Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Keaidy Bennett, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Keaidy Bennett here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Keaidy Bennett, and I'm excited to share with you the night that I realized everything changed. The night I realized that I might be the problem, I was still married to a man who knew how to destroy me without ever raising his voice. He didn't have to. I had already mastered the art of crumbling quietly. We were in intense therapy, couples and individual counseling. It was our last attempt, or maybe just my last performance as his wife. Anyway, I showed up like I always did, over-prepared, emotionally armed, and ready to prove that he was the sole problem in our relationship, and I was just the misunderstood and misused one, the faithful one, the forgiving one, the dangerously resilient one, the woman who accepted the babies that were proof of his infidelity, and the one who hid the bruises that were proof of his inability to control his emotions. But that day, during my individual session, my therapist did something that I didn't see coming. He paused the entire healing process and said he refused to take my plan forward unless I owned 50% of the failure in my marriage. 50, half. He wanted me to accept responsibility for part of the pain that had been inflicted on me by a broken man who didn't know how to love himself. I remember staring at my MacBook during that virtual, socially distanced session, looking at him like he had just betrayed every battered woman in history. I was the victim. Wasn't that obvious? From the physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, gaslighting, isolation, reproductive coercion, psychological warfare. I could go on. Didn't he see how much I'd survived? And yet, now I recognize that what he offered me wasn't betrayal. It was the first invitation to healing I had ever been given. I used to wear pain like a custom jacket. It fit me. It moved with me. It told my story before I ever had to open my mouth. You could hear it in my tone, see it in my eyes, and feel it in the way that I over-explained or just shut down completely. I didn't survive hard things. I built an entire identity around them. And to be real, I made it work and look good. I was the woman who got up when she shouldn't, the one who carried everybody else's weight and still delivered, and you couldn't tell me I wasn't strong. But when strength becomes your survival strategy, it starts costing you things you didn't realize until they're already gone. I lost my softness first, my intuition next, and eventually I lost myself entirely. My marriage was bleeding out, but I was more committed to the illusion than the truth. I had become a professional survivor, praising God for saving my marriage, while suffocating under the lies that I had to tell that I built. Allowing threesomes just to keep the peace, mothering babies I didn't birth, and suppressing my dreams so he could chase his. I pretended my American Express could fix what my soul was begging me to confront. That therapy session cracked something open in me when he asked me to take responsibility and showed me that I always had more power than I thought. Not power to control what happened to me, but power to choose how I moved forward. And I hadn't been moving forward. I had been rewording the story and just pressing replay. I wish I could tell you that my pain started in adulthood, but the truth is I was trained for chaos long before I ever met my ex-husband. Abandonment was my first language. As a child, I learned to perform strength the way other little girls learn ballet or handwriting. I didn't have the luxury of softness. I had to grow up fast, read rooms, anticipate danger, and stay 10 steps ahead of emotions I was too young to even name. When you're raised on survival, red flags become so familiar they just feel like home. So by the time I entered adulthood, my nervous system felt most at home in dysfunction. Healthy love didn't feel safe. Consistency didn't feel familiar. And peace, that was suspicious. We repeat the pain we don't repair, and we repeat what we survived because we know we can survive it. And that's how I walked from childhood into adult trauma, thinking it was love, thinking that loyalty. But something shifted in me the day he said, own your 50%. That permission he gave me allowed me to have permission to examine how trauma had trained me, how I had to acknowledge the ways I abandoned myself long before anyone else did. And it also gave me permission to stop rehearsing resistance and resilience and start practicing responsibility. So I created a framework, a simple one that started as a writing strategy, but then became my life strategy. Plan, write, edit, and publish. At first, it was how I taught aspiring authors to organize their books, but then I realized something else. You can use it to organize your life too. The real transformation happened when I started applying that very simple thought process. I didn't need a hero and a villain in my story when we're all complex characters. And I had to start with myself first. That was the first time that I had ever stopped performing my pain and I started reframing it. So I did something and I changed it, and I want to share that with you today. Plan, write, edit, publish. When you take the time to plan, write, and edit and publish your story, you give yourself permission to tell it in a different way. I didn't know it then, but that decision would grow into a publishing house that would help me to grow a publishing house that now writes and produces books for world leaders, CEOs, creatives, and change makers all across the country. That framework would lead me into ghostwriting and a career I never even imagined. It would allow me to build stories that change lives, not because I'm lucky, but because I learned how to rewrite my own. None of this would have ever happened if I didn't sit down and plan something different. If I didn't have the courage to write a future I had never seen modeled. If I didn't edit the parts of myself that were built in trauma, not truth. If I didn't publish a version of me who believed she was worthy of more than just suffering. And yes, my children were the motivation. I refused to let my daughter inherit the burden of being a built-in second mother, the emotional glue, the girl who's praised for her silence that's dressed up as strength. I refused to let my sons grow into little kings who learned to lead before they ever learned to listen. I wanted a balanced home and not a reenactment of the Latin culture I came from. But I couldn't teach them until I modeled it first. Kids don't learn from who we tell them to be. They learn from who we are. So I became the woman who could show them another way. Not a perfect mother, but an honest one. Not a finished leader, but a present one. So I used that method. Plan, write, edit, publish. And that's how I built the life I wanted. A life that transformed me. And a life that gives me something different to pass on to them. When I look back at that day, sitting at my MacBook, shocked and offended, I now see exactly why that moment mattered. I wasn't being asked to take blame. I was asked to take back the pen. I can't change my past, and I can't edit the story of what happened to me, but I can edit how I tell the story. And once you're willing to edit the story, the ending transforms. So here's my invitation to you. You don't need to rewrite your entire life tonight, but you do need to pick up the pen. Plan the life you actually want. Write the truth about where you've been. Edit the parts of your story that no longer fit who you're becoming. And publish the version of yourself, your future, and your lineage deserves. because you can't change what happened, but you can change what happens next. And that choice is where generational freedom begins.
What a fantastic story. My goodness. And you have given our listeners a
Mm,
framework that is so simple and so easy to follow. But your journey has not been an easy one.
no.
I absolutely love what you've done. Now, when were you first inspired to speak publicly about your experience with domestic violence? What inspired you?
Ironically, I had already been speaking about domestic violence when I met my ex-husband. I thought because he was a pastor's son and he was so open about his testimony of being an abuser, I thought I was changing it. And I was like, wow, God is putting us together to be loud and to be a voice of redemption and healing. And so I was already doing that when I met him, and I thought we were going to do something different when we originally met.
Okay, so you were already on this journey.
Yes.
Now, you talk about abandonment being the root of pain. How did that realization change your healing journey?
It clicked for me when I realized that I had always been making mistakes and accepting mistakes on the behalf of my biological father. Ever since I was a young girl, I was like, oh, he's busy, he's working. I just got comfortable, just excusing the lack of love or the lack of his presence. And I started doing that, I noticed, with my partners. And it just clicked for me one day when he had made a promise to help me. And he said, he was going to help me get a house and do some stuff with my children. And then, like always, he didn't fall through with it. And it was in that moment that I realized that he'd been doing this to me my whole life, and I had allowed that to transform into my interpersonal relationships with men. And so I just got comfortable making excuses for men's poor behavior.
Mm. Wow, it is amazing what our parenting can do to our children.
Mhm.
So, what was the moment that you knew that you were done surviving and ready to start thriving?
When I knew I had tried everything. In my marriage, my therapist was very helpful. He gave a lot of tools. He helped me to see where, even though I wasn't the aggressor, I was still an active participant in the violence that was taking place in my home that my children were experiencing. And so
Yeah.
that invitation to start seeing the part I played allowed me to start, I don't want to call it being submissive, but I learned how to play a better part, if you will. I wouldn't let him agitate me or aggravate me to a point of reactive abuse, because I think
Mhm.
sometimes as survivors, we can get too comfortable just saying, well, it was reactive, but it's still abuse, you
Yeah.
know? And so when I took my responsibility of realizing that I don't want my children to go through that, I learned how to stay quiet, and I learned how to not suppress emotions, but just recognize that it's not always the right time just because it feels like the right time to bring it up now. So I took that invitation of everything that he shared and I used it, and I realized he's not applying any of these things. I'm the only one applying it, and what's happening is instead of it helping, he now doesn't know what to do. And when I've finally sat with my emotions and I brought them to him, even if it was calm, collected, even if it was, not explosive, he still
Mhm.
didn't know how to receive it. And so I think that's when I got the comfort to realize that he had already given me an out through all of the infidelity and the abuse, and I didn't have to perform for him anymore.
Mm. Wow. Now, how can storytelling become a form of therapy for survivors?
Oh, it's my favorite kind, honestly, because I just think that when you take the time to really identify your story, we do this exercise that we've helped other clients through, And we asked them to write their story separate from themselves. So write it from a third person point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I did that exercise myself, I was embarrassed to put all of the details in one story. I didn't want to put the fact that there was outside babies and abuse and multiple women and threesomes, for example, right? I didn't want to put any of that in there. And that's what made me realize like I had allowed way too much to happen.
Yeah.
And I had compartmentalized in a way that allowed me to survive in the moment, but it just shrunk me in such a way that I didn't recognize myself in any capacity. So I think
Wow.
for any survivor who's ready to change their story is to tell it like they're just a narrator and allow themselves the opportunity to feel the fullness of all of the decisions from their partner, from what they accepted to what they allowed, and to see that in its entirety, to recognize, is this something that you want to continue with?
Hmm. Wow. Now, what role does accountability play in transforming trauma into power?
This is always such a touchy subject because sometimes I think people think that when you extend that invitation for accountability and responsibility, that you're victim blaming, and you're not. I
Mm,
think the most important thing that people understand is that you have a job criteria. When you apply for a job, they tell you the job descriptions. They tell you who they're looking for, right? The Bible, it tells you what the Lord is looking for from our posture, correct? So everything has a criteria. Abusers also have a criteria. There's
mm,
something in us that they saw, that they knew that they were able to get away with everything that they got away with. And so if we don't acknowledge the parts of us that are invitations to become prey to men like this, we're going to
mm.
repeat the cycle.
It'll happen again.
Mhm.
Wow. Incredible. So, you've worked with both as a survivor and as a professional helping others. How has seeing both sides shaped your understanding?
Seeing both sides has shaped my understanding just in a way that it helps me to relate to the survivor. I'm able to kind of brace for some of these different parts of grief, and it allows me to prepare whenever I'm helping someone else. Taking that time to first be honest with myself, to have all of my own emotions validated, and to
Mm,
have things labeled was life changing for me because there were certain things that I'm like, I just felt crazy for dealing with. And then, you get around other professionals and you realize that there's a name for some of these things. And it's just really transformed how I'm able to help not only survivors, but as well and educating the community in how domestic violence and, just not being with our story hurts us as a whole.
that is so true. Whew. So many women stay silent out of fear and, like you said, out of shame. What gave you the permission to speak?
The thing that gave me the permission to speak, because Lord knows when it was finally all said and done, I felt so embarrassed. I had to pick back up my business. Because remember, when I met him, I already had this business going and I put
Mm,
my dreams on pause and on hold. And so I had come to a really dark point in my life, and I had contemplated just ending it all for myself. I went from this lavish life that my children were able to have to now I'm sharing a bedroom at my mom's house again. And it was so just heartbreaking that I wanted it all to end.
mm,
And what ended up happening is I gave myself a timeline. My pastor Sarah, she taught me. She said, every emotion needs a timeline, right? You give it a timer. And so even though I was feeling so depressed that I was ready to end it all, I gave myself 30 days. I said, I'm going to give 30 days to live my life to its fullest. And I'm going to go all out. I'm going to be fearless. I'm going to do things I never imagined I would do.
mm,
And I did a deal with the professional NFL player. And that just opened up a completely different market for me. And we started doing all types of things. I was booking events. I started having conversations with businesses I never imagined I'd be working with. And in that time frame, it just made me realize that I was going to feel fear anyways. You know, when we come out of abusive situations, we feel safer inside of them because we know what to expect. So I wasn't prepared for when I came out, and I was more scared then than I ever was living with him. And so when I realized I'm going to feel the fear anyway, let's just go big or go home. And I started to see the impact of just being fearless and not caring what people thought or what they were going to say. And ironically, the more I kept sharing my story and the more I kept pursuing my dreams, people that I thought were judging me were coming to me and asking me for help and guidance and actually needed more of the information that I had to share.
That's amazing. So, how did breaking the cycle impact your relationship with your daughter and future generations, do you think?
I think for me, it really helped me in the understanding because sometimes I love my parents. I want to stress that I do. I recognize now as an adult that, you know, it's just two people. Sometimes they don't always know the right and the healthiest ways to show that love in a household. And the children feel that, right? They feel the pettiness, the back and forth, the bickering, the silence in the home. My daughter doesn't have to be raised in that. Neither do my sons. They don't have to see that. And so they get the formula of seeing a happy mother who is pursuing her dreams. My mom is a brilliant writer. And, you know, who knows what she would have done if she were to be able to come over to the States and have the same freedom to pursue her dreams the way I did. Who knows what that relationship could have been from an early on age if she had that same freedom. And so now I have a freedom that I didn't really see the women before me have. And that
Yeah.
allows me to be a soft space for my daughter. So when she's going through something, I'm not so into survival mode or so into the problems of my marriage that I'm not able to stop and meet her for her crisis that comes up that every teenager has, you know, at least once a week. So it really opens up an opportunity for me to be present
Yeah,
and responsive in a way that I've never seen anybody else be able to be.
that's just beautiful. Wow. So, some good really came out of all of this.
Absolutely.
So, why do you think society still struggles to have honest conversations about domestic violence?
You know, I think the reason we struggle with it is because when people hear domestic violence, they only think the physical part. Even
Yeah.
when I was working as an advocate, working closely with survivors, we have a tendency to just downplay what's happening. Well, at least this didn't happen. Well, at least that didn't happen. Forgetting that we were still betrayed, we were still hurt, we were still left with lifelong consequences. And so we kind of get comfortable gaslighting ourselves in the process.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is I think that no one wants to be the villain in their story. And we all, as complex characters, we all have the tendency to hurt people, even without intentionally trying to do that. So that requires a little bit of work of acknowledging the moments where we were potentially the villain in someone else's story. And I think that requires an invitation where we can create a safe space for people to admit their wrongs and to do so in a way where we don't just immediately shun them out. I think the only way that we're really going to be able to address this is to recognize that we've got hurt people just hurting people in the dynamic. And so until we can get honest about, you know, we can sometimes good people do bad things. And then sometimes that can happen so much that it just becomes a personality or personality disorder. But there's healthy ways to fix all of that if we're willing to create the space to label everything and then create a plan that doesn't always villainize someone.
That is so true. So, what misconceptions do people have about victims or survivors that you would like to challenge?
Great question. So one of the things that I have really advocated on is I believe that if I were a heroin addict or an addict of some sort, you would have suggested that I go to some sort of rehabilitation.
Yes.
The same thing needs to happen, unfortunately, for survivors of domestic violence. We
Mm,
also need a sense of rehabilitation. So our nervous system has a time to get recalibrated, to feel safe, to learn what safety is again. But the sad part about it is that we don't get that. We're oftentimes just thrown out there. I know that when I first came out of it, I stayed with my moms for a little bit. I lived in hotels for a little bit. My children slept in my office for a little bit because my credit was so bad. And I couldn't get our own place for a while. And
yeah.
so, there was a lot of things that I was just in a rat race, if you will, just
Yeah.
constantly fighting, never having a chance to breathe. And so I think more people need to understand that survivors need a lot more support than they're given, because it's actually when we come out that statistics prove that is the most dangerous for us. And it's also when we
Mhm.
feel the most afraid, because now I don't have the ability to anticipate this person's needs. I'm
Yes.
also going through the grief cycle. My brain in that process is not helping me, In that moment, it's reliving some of those things of, well, maybe I was to blame. Maybe I could try this again. And so we have all of these things while trying to mother, while trying to build, while trying to move forward. And I don't think that we oftentimes give survivors the real support that's needed to really be able to move forward.
Wow. There's so much to think about. So, how can communities and workplaces better support women who are silently suffering?
This is something that I have also proposed to a couple different entities. I think employers are going to be our biggest allies
Mm,
in transforming this. When I was a
right.
victim of domestic violence, the numbers were 1 in 4 women. It's now 1 in 3, and it's trending towards 1 in 2. That means the problem is getting bigger.
Wow. Getting
That
bigger.
right. And it's only going to continue until we get more community help. You know,
Yes.
the resources, the nonprofits, they're overextended just because of how everything happens.
Yeah.
And so the employers have an opportunity to bring in advocates, to bring in and work with agencies to provide solutions. I was
Right.
working for a financial firm at the time, and working at this firm, I knew everything about money laundering, fraud, how to recognize different things, but no one taught me how to recognize financial abuse. There was
Mm,
no system in place for me to put something to say, hey guys, I didn't mean to be late to work this morning. My
yeah.
husband just withheld the keys and refused to let me leave.
Jeez.
And so there were things that my employer had the ability to, if they provided a framework that a woman could outline or maybe clock in differently to say, to silently show that there's abuse going on at home or there's
Yeah.
something happening, just kind of like a silent whistle, and being able to bring in advocates in those spaces, I think
Mm-hmm.
we'll be able to disrupt the cycle of abuse.
Mm.
And that's really the only way to get someone the real help they need, is to catch them in the middle of certain cycles while it's
And things
happening.
are going on.
Right.
My last two questions are a bit of a thought experiment. The first one, I'm going to teleport you back to the past,
Okay.
to that young woman who was in the middle of a storm. She couldn't see the wood from the trees. Just in case there is a woman who's listening to this podcast right now, if you could go back and give yourself 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
You're not afraid of anyone abandoning you. You're more afraid of abandoning yourself. You alone are worthy. You do not have to perform for love. And the final piece of nugget that I would give to that woman would be that your dreams are waiting for you. You just have to start.
It's absolutely beautiful. Now I'm going to teleport you into the future, and
Ooh,
we are
okay.
going to go and meet the 90-year-old you. And she is sitting in her rocking chair, surrounded by her children, her grandchildren, whoever's with you at the end. If you could go and meet this wise woman who has led you up until this point, what will you say to her when you finally meet her?
What would I say to her when I finally meet her? I would tell her thank you for always choosing to move forward and never giving up. I would thank her for not letting um, the thoughts that seem to overtake us at times of worthlessness, of fear of failure, of fear of success. I would thank her for not succumbing to that. And I would thank her for moving towards what it was that we prioritized. Because even in this, building a business and doing all of these things, it's been really fun. But to see that version of myself surrounded by family and to know that that's really what matters is to be able to be an orator, to be able to share wisdom and to give light and love to the generations to come. I would thank her for her commitment to doing that, no matter how overbearing some of these thoughts were.
Absolutely fantastic. I love asking that last question, Katie, because a lot of women don't realize that the wise woman is already in us, that she is that quiet voice of reason that tells you to leave. She is that little whisper that says you deserve better than this. But sometimes, as women, we don't listen to her. We push the voice away, we disregard her, but she is in us. And we need to tune into that energy of who we are becoming.
Absolutely. I love that.
I have a little game that I play when I get stuck and I'm struggling with anything. I go into my meditation and prayers and I ask her questions. I
Oh,
know she's there in my future. I talk to her and I ask her, so what is the next step? What do I do now? And I sleep on that question. I wake up in the morning and I'm in the shower. I get these light bulb moments and I know exactly what my next step should be. Or I talk about what I'm working on with people that I meet during the day. One person will say this, the next person will say that. By the end of the day, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Each person brought a piece to the solution for me.
wow.
So, trusting ourselves, knowing that you are this amazing woman who was born with everything she needs to survive and thrive.
Yes.
So, thank you for being an example of that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that exercise with me. I think that's definitely something I want to start incorporating. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is not just a podcast. We are a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of women from all over the world. We share our stories to uplift you, to inspire you, to energize you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So if you are a woman who is wanting to rewrite her story, here is an amazing young woman who can help you do that in so many ways, not just to put your story in a book, but to help you write the next chapter, an inspiring chapter where you are thriving. I had her website at the bottom of the screen. I'll put it again. Reach out to Keaidy. Don't try and do this alone. And if you know a woman who needs this kind of help, we all know somebody who's going through domestic violence, who right now can't see the wood from the trees. Share this podcast, spread it on social media, and let's inspire through the sharing of our stories. I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody, with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And Keaidy, thanks again for this amazing interview.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye for now, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.